Sometimes the one least prepared to be a father becomes the best. Unknown author. His name was Samuel Peterson. Although, truth be told, hardly anyone remembered him that way anymore. In the small town, a simple Old Sam had stuck. And that was it. Short and clear. Like his life. He lived on the very edge of town, where civilization surrendered its ground, where shiny asphalt gave way to age-old dust, and streetlights turned into silent poles that had long forgotten what light was. His house stood apart, like a hermit. Hunched by the winds, weathered by time, with a porch you stepped onto with trepidation, it creaked so plaintively, as if recounting all the hardships of the years gone by. Sam was one of those for whom the past wasn't just a collection of memories, but a relentless shadow. It followed him silently, without asking permission, breathing down his neck in the quiet nights. Once, a long time ago, maybe 40 years back, his life had roared like a locomotive at full steam. He was an engineer, drove trains across the vast American heartland, knew schedules better than his multiplication tables, and could distinguish the roar of a diesel engine from a mile away, unerringly identifying the make. He had a wife, Nadia, with eyes the color of a summer sky. Had a daughter, Ellie, full of laughter, quick as a creek in springtime. He had everything. Everything needed for simple human happiness. Until one day, it all broke off. Terribly. Senselessly. Ellie drowned, 17 years old. After prom, she went with friends to the river. The water took her laughter, her future, and his wife. Nadia left a year later, quietly, in her sleep. The doctors wrote, heart failure, but Sam knew it was sorrow. It had simply drunk her dry. Since then, the gate to his house rarely opened. The phone remained silent. The glasses on the table were set only for him. He even drank his tea in absolute silence, as if any sound, even a conversation with his own mug, was an unforgivable luxury, a violation of the morning that had become his eternal companion. His life shrank to the size of his vegetable garden and an old cat, Ginger, bold, who had simply shown up at his door one frosty winter and stayed. Like everything important in his fate, it arrived without asking, without warning. It seemed Sam had resigned himself, accepted his lot, grew old, his soul cooled, like tea forgotten on a windowsill. But that night, everything changed. Winter was just testing its strength, timidly nipping at cheeks, and the frost hung not on the grass. It seemed dissolved in the very air, making it sharp and ringing. And that's when he heard the knock. Not a ring of the doorbell, but a knock. Quiet, intermittent, somehow desperately uncertain. As if someone, with their last strength, was pleading for help. He opened the heavy, warped door and froze. On the threshold stood a basket, an ordinary, woven, old basket, covered with a gray, well-worn blanket, and from beneath it came a thin, plaintive squeak, like a newborn kitten. Only, it wasn't a kitten. Under the blanket lay an infant. A boy, just a tiny thing, a defenseless bundle of life. Clutched in his tiny, clenched fist was a piece of paper. Unfolding it with trembling fingers, Sam read a single word. Forgive me. He stood rooted in the entryway, the cold air burning his face, yet he felt nothing. He looked at the baby, then at the note, then back at the baby, and couldn't believe it. Neither his eyes, nor this strange, absurd twist of fate. Carefully, as if afraid of breaking him, he lifted the baby out of the basket, pressed him against his scratchy work jacket, and at that moment, something inside him, long petrified by grief, cracked, or perhaps fused together, unexpectedly, painfully, and, rightly, He didn't know what to do next. Absolutely no idea. What now? Where to go? Who to call? But there was one thing he knew even less: how he could possibly leave this child here, in the cold, alone. He couldn't. He simply physically couldn't turn around and close the door. That night, his old, silent house was filled, for the first time in long years, with a different kind of breath. At first, barely audible, thin, fragile, and then, with meaning. New, unexpected, frightening, and yet offering hope. Thus began a new chapter in the measured, predictable desert of Sam's life. Without announcements, without instruction manuals, with wet diapers, sleepless nights, anxiety that made his jaw ache, and suddenly, with a quiet, warm, almost forgotten feeling of happiness. He didn't call himself a father. The word seemed too big, too responsible. But with each new dawn, with every portion of milk drunk from the bottle, with every cry soothed, he became one. More and more. The first weeks blurred into one long, hazy day. Bottles, nipples, diapers, endless nights punctuated by soft grunts and sudden cries. Sam, who had once controlled multi-ton machines, now felt utterly helpless before this tiny creature. He learned everything from scratch: how to hold him properly so as not to drop him, how to calm that inconsolable wail, when to bathe him, and when was it enough just to hold him close and share his own warmth, which he felt he himself had almost none left of. He looked at the sleeping baby, and something inside him flinched every time, as if fate was giving him a second chance. Or was it a sophisticated punishment for the past? He didn't know. He just did what he had to do. He named the boy Ethan. The name came on its own, simple, American. No middle name, no last name, for now. "We'll see about that later," he muttered to the cat, who now watched the new resident with obvious jealousy, sharing the old man's attention. But that later arrived much faster than he expected. A week later, an official-looking car pulled up to his gate. One of the neighbors, perhaps out of compassion, perhaps out of simple envy, seeing the old man awkwardly cradling an infant in an old blanket, had reported it. Sam hadn't heard the engine. He only realized what had happened when someone knocked on the door. Short, authoritative, demanding. Not at all like that other night. Samuel Peterson? A woman in her 40s, with a sharp, cold gaze and a folder in her hands, looked him up and down. Beside her lingered a young man, silent, but with an air suggesting he was scanning him, the dilapidated house, and his entire life. "That's me," Sam answered hoarsely, instinctively shielding Ethan, who slept peacefully in his arms, unaware of the looming threat. "We have information, a report, that you have a child here. You are not his legal guardian, neither adoptive nor related. You have no documents for him. Are you aware that this is against the law?" "I am." Sam's voice creaked like unoiled hinges, but he straightened his back. "But this child, he's alive, fed, and warm. That's what matters." "Mr. Peterson, you must understand, we are obligated to take the child. That's the procedure. We follow protocol. He will be placed in a children's home." Sam said nothing. He just looked at the woman, straight in the eyes, for a long time, so long that she grew uncomfortable under his gaze. There was no pleading in it, no threat. There was a kind of deep, unbending rightness and pain, the kind that doesn't scream but lives silently within. "Give me time," he said finally, quietly but firmly. "A week. I'll sort out the paperwork. I won't give him up. He's my boy. But legally, he's not yours. Then whose is he?" The question hung in the ringing silence of the room. Only the old clock on the wall continued to tick away the seconds, and Ethan breathed quietly in his sleep, trustingly pressed against his grandpa, as if he knew for sure. As long as Grandpa was near, nothing bad could happen. The woman sighed, as if making a difficult decision, and slowly closed the folder. "All right, you have 1 week. We will come back in 7 days. If there are no documents confirming your right to guardianship, we will be forced to proceed with removal. Do you have an ID? Any documents at all?" "I have an ID." Sam nodded, and added almost in a whisper, but so they heard, "And I have a conscience too." When the car drove away, leaving only a cloud of exhaust fumes, Sam sank heavily onto an old kitchen stool. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't cry. He hadn't had tears for a long time. He just stared out the window, where the car had disappeared, where only emptiness and his fear remained. He had no idea how to apply for guardianship, where to go, who to approach, what papers to collect. He was old, alone, and poor. But he was absolutely sure of one thing. He would not give Ethan up, not for anything. From that day on, a new battle began for Sam. A battle against the system, against indifference, against his own age and infirmity. Documents, endless lines at government offices, humiliating proof of income, health status, living conditions. He traveled to the county seat on the old bus, knocked on office doors, talked to officials, explained, pleaded, bowed, sometimes, out of desperation, even stretched the truth. He did everything not to lose this little person who had so unexpectedly burst into his life and filled it with meaning. He became his father, not by blood, not by law, by choice, by the calling of his heart. And this was only the beginning of a long, difficult journey. Sam eventually secured guardianship. It cost him his last nerves, the remnants of his health, and almost all his savings, which were meager to begin with. How many times was he turned away? How many times did he hear, "Gramps, what are you thinking? You're old, barely walking yourself." But he didn't give up. His neighbor, Martha Davis, a retired teacher, helped him, helped gather papers, write applications. He visited some old acquaintance he'd served with long ago to get a positive character reference. All this time, he barely slept, grew gaunt, aged another 10 years. But he achieved his goal. Ethan stayed with him. And the boy grew like young grass after rain, quickly, confidently, eagerly soaking up life. His laughter now rang in the old house like the clearest bell on a gloomy day, chasing away the shadows of the past. But this joy was clouded by constant need. Money melted away like spring snow. Sam's pension barely covered the essentials: bread, cheap milk, grains, and occasionally diapers, while he was very small. When Ethan turned 2, Sam stopped buying even the cheapest tea for himself, saving every penny for shoes for growing feet. The garden became their main provider. He planted everything that could possibly grow in their poor soil. He learned to pickle cucumbers and even zucchini, just to have something to put on the table in winter. And he guarded the potatoes in the shed like the greatest treasure. To somehow make ends meet, he took a job as a night watchman at the local school. The night shifts were exhausting. An old, ailing man, he would doze off on his feet, leaning against a mop in the dark hallway. Sometimes, waking up, he wouldn't immediately understand where he was or what was happening. One winter morning, returning home after such a shift, he felt a sharp weakness. His head spun, his legs gave way. He collapsed right on the threshold of his own house. He came to in his room, on his bed. Martha's worried face bent over him, and nearby, on the edge of the bed, sat little Ethan, quietly stroking his large wrinkled hand with his tiny palm. "Grandpa, don't die. "Please don't die," he whispered so seriously, so grown up, that Sam's heart clenched with pain and tenderness. In that moment, he felt like he had betrayed the boy. That the child, who deserved a happy, carefree childhood, was forced to witness his weakness, his poverty, his despair. He blamed himself for everything, for not being able to give Ethan more, for getting old, weaker, and for the all-consuming fear that lived constantly within him. Fear became his second companion, after the shadow of the past. Fear that one day Ethan would get seriously ill, and he wouldn't have money for the necessary medicine. Fear that someone from Child Protective Services would come again and say, "That's it, old man, you're not coping. The boy needs a proper family, not poverty and your ailments." Fear that he himself simply wouldn't last long enough, that he would leave before he could get Ethan on his feet. In the spring, new trouble struck. The roof leaked badly after the snowmelt. There was no money for repairs. Sam climbed up to fix it himself, clumsily, using an old rope as a makeshift safety line. And he fell. Not far, luckily, but he badly bruised his back. He spent a month bent over, enduring the pain. But he complained to no one. Just wrapped himself tighter in his old, patched-up jacket. And Ethan grew. He started school, learned to read voraciously, devouring books from the school library. In the yard, he built incredible spaceships out of old boards and sticks, dreaming of flying to the stars. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, he would approach his grandpa and ask, looking with his clear, inquisitive eyes, "Grandpa, where's my mom? Why did she leave me?" Sam would fall silent. He didn't know how to lie, especially to Ethan. But he couldn't tell the whole truth either, the truth he himself didn't know. He would just silently stroke his light hair and say the same thing every time. "You have me, Ethan, and I have you. That's what matters." They were everything to each other, like a ship and its only anchor in a stormy sea, or like a thin candle and the hand gently shielding it from the wind. But Sam felt time was relentless. He was aging faster than he should. Illnesses clung to him one after another. His hands began to tremble more noticeably. His legs ached by evening as if an electric current had passed through them. And one day, when the propane tank unexpectedly ran empty, Sam didn't have the money to pay for a new one. For 3 long, cold days, they huddled by the old wood stove in the kitchen, where only one burner worked. They slept buried under all the blankets in the house. Martha brought them hot food, and Ethan, seeing his grandpa shivering in his old heavy coat, silently took off his own warm blanket and covered him with it. Sam never cried. Not when he lost his daughter, not when his wife died, not when life beat him down again and again. But on that cold night, when the boy was already asleep, curled up beside him, he couldn't hold back. Quiet, silent tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks. Tears not from physical pain or cold, from fear. From the sharp, knife-like question he asked himself over and over, what if he really couldn't cope? What if he finally broke? He stared at the dark ceiling and thought, maybe I really shouldn't have kept him then. Maybe I should have given him up, like they demanded. He would have been warm there. He would have been fed properly. He wouldn't have seen this poverty, this old, sick grandpa. But just then, Ethan mumbled something in his sleep, turned over, and snuggled closer to him, seeking protection and warmth. "Grandpa, you're my very best," the child's lips whispered. And in that moment, Sam knew. No, never, not ever. He would fight, to his last breath. Spring arrived hesitantly that year. Snow still lingered in shady corners, melting slowly, reluctantly, as if nature itself feared wounding them with sudden warmth after the long winter. But one March morning, while smoke still rose from their cottage chimney from the morning fire, Ethan returned from school not just happy. He practically flew into the house, his eyes shining brighter than the timid spring sun outside. "Grandpa, can you believe it? They chose me to read at the contest for our whole school." "What contest, Ethan?" Sam cleared his throat raspily, setting aside the old newspaper he held more for show than reading. "The citywide reading contest. The theme is Family Is. I wrote it myself. Well, a poem about us. Embellished a little, though. Can I read it to you? Right now?" Without waiting for an answer, Ethan stood in the middle of their small kitchen, straightened up like a soldier on parade, took a deep breath, and began to read. His voice trembled slightly at first, but then grew stronger, ringing out clear and bright. "When I was just a little sprout, my grandpa made potato soup. Just 2 spuds, but he would shout, 'A royal feast for our small troop.' He fixed my broken clockwork toys when all their little springs went bad. He brought the light with gentle noise when darkness was all others had. I've never ever seen my mom, but know for sure, right here, nearby, my most important person's home, my truest guardian, standing by. He's old, smells like the smoke and ground. He's simply here, he's simply near, and kindness shines, I've always found, in wrinkles that erase all fear." Sam listened, and didn't immediately realize that his hands, resting on his knees, were trembling slightly. He was silent, just looked at Ethan, no longer a little boy, but a lanky teenager, thin, awkward, with the perpetually worn hole on the elbow of his school shirt, and couldn't believe his ears. These weren't just words strung into rhyme. This was acknowledgement. This was love. The simple, real kind he had been so afraid he didn't deserve. At the city contest, Ethan won first place. He came home beaming, with a large certificate in a nice folder and an unexpected prize, a hefty food basket, which came in very handy. Sam took the certificate, studied the ornate letters for a long time, and then carefully placed it in an old wooden frame found in the attic. At first, he wanted to hang it in the entryway for everyone to see. Then, he decided, better in the kitchen, where they spent most of their time. Then, he changed his mind again and carried it to his own room. In the end, he carried that certificate around the house for 3 days, placing it on the table, on the windowsill, just to look at it and feel the warm wave of pride wash over him. And then, it was like a dam broke. The success at the contest attracted attention. The school, seeing the abilities and perseverance of the boy from a poor family, found a way for Ethan to attend the robotics club at the city's community center for free. The computer science teacher, noticing Ethan's enthusiasm for programming on the old, constantly freezing school computer, brought his own old but perfectly functional, larger monitor from home one day. People started noticing Ethan, praising him. At the regional math Olympiad, he took first place again, beating kids from the city's magnet schools. "Your boy's got a bright head on his shoulders, Sam," the school principal said, clapping Sam friendly on the back after another of Ethan's successes. "And he's got character, smart, persistent, a talented kid growing up here. He'll go far." Sam just nodded, hiding a smile in his gray mustache. But inside him, something grew and strengthened, flared up like the fire in the stove. He suddenly realized he had almost stopped being afraid. The fear for Ethan's future was replaced by confidence, because Ethan was becoming strong. No longer a helpless baby left on the doorstep, but a person, a real human being. And one evening, as they sat in the kitchen after dinner, Ethan, who had already outgrown his grandpa by a head, suddenly said seriously, gazing somewhere into the distance, "Grandpa, I've decided. I want to become the kind of person who can really change things, so that people like us, well, so people don't freeze in winter without gas. So everyone has a chance, you know, not just to survive, but to live properly. Sam looked at him for a long time, attentively, intently, and then, for the first time in many years, he smiled, openly, warmly, without a shadow of his former sorrow. That's the right decision, Ethan. Then go. Go and change things. And I'll be nearby. As long as I have strength. As long as I can. Samuel Peterson turned 80. Age had taken its toll. He hardly ever left the yard anymore. His back ached constantly, nagging as if he were still carrying the invisible but unbearable weight of his lived years. But he didn't complain. He never complained. Ethan had gone away to study in Washington, D.C. Help had come for him to get into a prestigious university, from school teachers and concerned people who learned his story. Then came internships abroad, active participation in student life, the first steps in public service. He grew rapidly, not so much in years, but in the scale of the tasks he set for himself. He wrote letters to his grandpa regularly, not emails, but real paper letters, covered in his sprawling handwriting. He called almost every day, came to visit whenever he had the chance. Each visit was a holiday for Sam, with gifts, warm socks, strong hugs, and long talks by the stove. But one day, he disappeared. For several months, no calls, no letters, only oppressive silence on the phone line and an empty mailbox. Sam worried terribly, his heart clenched with bad premonitions, but he remained silent, showed his anxiety to no one, only went out more often onto the old creaky porch, staring for long periods down the deserted road, leading from the town to the big world, and quietly told his old, now also gray cat, "It's all right, Ginger, just wait. He'll be back soon. He always comes back. He promised." That day was no different from others. A gray, gloomy sky hung low over the earth, a fine, tedious drizzle falling. Sam sat in his old sagging armchair by the window, sipping weak tea and half watching the news on the small, ancient TV. The picture flickered, the sound crackled, but something made him watch. On the screen, they showed some solemn event in the Capitol, seemed like an inauguration. The swearing in of the new president, young, energetic, said to be very smart, with a brilliant education. Sam watched distractedly, lost in his own thoughts, until the announcer spoke the name. Ethan Samuel Peterson. Sam froze. Slowly, very slowly, he placed the cup on the saucer. So slowly, as if afraid to scare away something unreal. "Can't be," he whispered with dry lips. Then, with difficulty, he rose, walked almost up to the TV, peering at the face on the screen. Familiar features, the same eyes, the same mole on the cheek he had kissed thousands of times when Ethan was little. It was him, his Ethan. Sam didn't hear the solemn speech the president was giving. He heard only the deafening thud of his own heart in his ears. His knees buckled, and he sank heavily back into the armchair. He sat like that for a long time, motionless, staring at the blank screen. And in the evening, when it was completely dark, there was another knock on the door. That same knock, quiet but insistent, like on that distant winter night 20 years ago. Sam, leaning on his cane, shuffled to the door, opened it. On the porch stood a man, tall, in a strict dark coat. Behind him, figures of security guards were visible, silhouettes of large black cars, some people. But he looked only at Sam, and in his eyes, despite all the formality of the moment, there was something unchanging, inexpressibly warm, familiar. "Hello, Grandpa," Ethan said, simply, as if the months of silence, the dizzying ascent, had never happened. And all Sam could do was exhale deeply. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the waiting. And then he simply stepped forward and hugged him tightly, with all his remaining strength, without words, because words were completely unnecessary at that moment. Everything was said in that embrace. "I didn't come as president, Grandpa," Ethan said quietly as they entered the house, his voice trembling slightly. "I came as your grandson, as your son, as that little boy you picked up on this porch and didn't abandon, whom you nursed, fed, educated, whom you taught how to be human." He took a document in a beautiful frame from an expensive leather briefcase, an award certificate, with a seal, presidential. "This is for you, Grandpa, officially, for special contribution to the future of the country, for faith in humanity, for your incredible resilience, for love. I wanted the whole country to know who raised me, who made me who I am." Sam didn't answer. He took the certificate with trembling hands, looked at it, then at Ethan, and simply stroked his cheek, just as he had stroked it many years ago, comforting him after a nightmare. And then they sat in the old cramped kitchen and drank tea, with the same ginger cat, now completely gray and phlegmatic, purring on Ethan's lap. And the old TV no longer worked, but it wasn't needed anyway, because the most important things in their lives had already happened. Spring came genuinely early and warm that year. The snow melted quickly, and the earth breathed steam gratefully. Warmth was felt everywhere, in the gentle sun, in the swelling buds on the trees, in the brightened faces of people. Sam was no longer left alone. Ethan visited often, sometimes without warning, just to sit beside his grandpa on the old porch. They would sit in silence, as they used to in Ethan's childhood, or talk about the simplest things. Not about state affairs, not politics, not laws. About how best to plant cabbage this year. About the weather. About how unusually early the chokecherry by the gate had bloomed. On the kitchen table, under the thick glass, still lay that same small, yellowed with time note, with one word: "Forgive me." Sam had never thrown it away all these years, and never read it aloud. It was simply part of their history. Sometimes, when alone, he would look at it and think, and what exactly is there to forgive? That fate brought this boy to me? That it gave me the chance to become a father, even if not by blood? That I managed, endured, didn't break? He didn't know if he would ever hear the answer to that question. And did he even need it now? One clear April morning, brewing himself herbal tea gathered last summer, he looked at that note and quietly but distinctly said into the empty room, "And I am grateful." And for the first time in many, many years, his face lit up with a calm, bright smile. When Sam passed away, hundreds, if not thousands, of people came to pay their last respects. Many of them had never known him personally. Some he wouldn't have recognized himself. These were people whose lives had been touched, one way or another, by his simple, yet powerful story. The story of a small man with a big heart. And on the modest gravestone, beneath his name, there was no list of titles or awards. Nor was there that presidential commendation. Only a few simple lines, spoken once by Ethan, which best captured the essence of old Sam's life. He did not father, but he raised. He did not promise, but he kept. He did not preach love, he simply loved.